Hi, it's Anna Meyer again, and this time it's the kind of a look at how the island world machine file is structured. This is a video primarily intended to my cartographer backers that have the access to this file, and they can play with it and they can export the results and basically do everything that I did in order to create the island map. But I'm going to make this public so anyone get a chance to get the overview of this. I've made a couple of videos detailing parts of this before, and I'm going to add others, particular videos on how to do the details and get nitty-gritty in the technical details. But this video is more to get the overview of how the file is structured, so you can understand how to use it. And they can also be of interest to the ones that don't want to get all kind of get your hands gritty in all the details. This looks like a motherboard basically, with all these kind of connectors and the lines in between. That's the flow of data. This is a big, like a network of nodes and lines connecting them, and all the white lines here are elevation data, and then if we go further away from here, you get the blue lines here are texture data, and then there are a few orange lines, and those are the ones that have gotten abandoned and left over, and they carry no data. So they should have been cleaned out, but I haven't got to that yet. So, and this is the file I'm using, the production version of the file, and you have a number of groups here. To be fair, there's like, first there's a purple group here, and you have a green group, a tiny little blue group, and a big brown group here, and a red group here. I'm going to take them one at a time. And if we start with the purple group here, that's the controller and view group. So everything that you need in order to create the work with the terrain, when you're not doing the programming, but if you want to create terrain, you want to say where the highlands are, where the coastlines are, where forests are supposed to be, and also when you look at the result, this is, I grouped them all together so you get all these controls in one spot. And if you look at the views, you look up here, you can see a 3D view that is textured. And here you have it is called text W4. That means textured with forest. And you can also go here and you get the same view without forest. And you can get elevation view, and you can also have, this one doesn't matter. This says C. That means that you can see you get the oceans are simply, you see the surface of the ocean, not the depth of them. It doesn't matter much in this file, but in some of the other files, it might be a big difference. So those are the views that I'm working with. You can add more views because the data is coming in here from all the parts, and then you can create more views, and that way you can easily shift between them. And here you have all the controllers. So you can just double click on them and you go in here and you can see all the layouts that are used with this one. So I've used terrain 1 here, 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 and maybe some, nope, that was it. And then I go back out again and I can go over and see where I used lakes and rivers, for instance. I double click on that one and you get all the lakes and the rivers. So this is a quick way of getting, because you get a lot of these tabs over here, and they are generated in the order, or these tabs are ordered in the way you generate the layouts, the layout generators. So it become kind of difficult to organize things after a while. So I organized them here so I can just double click and go between them. And here you have things like blur, you have controller blur, you have all the different types of, you have type highlands, base terrains, terrain features, erosion controls, lakes and rivers. And here you have forest control and biome. I've only had one biome in this so far. This project is only one biome, but soon I can plug in more biomes as needed. Okay, so that's the first group. And then there's the little one I added extra. That one should not really be somewhere else, but it ended up there. I will clean it up for the next project. The next major group here is where all the terrain is generated, all the elevation is generated here. You have the base terrains here, 1, 2, 3, and I have different highlands and a blur, and then I have extra terrain features. That will be things like hollow out for lakes, and hillify, that means small bumpy hills, and you can have things like boulders, craters, a lot of different things can end up here. And the thing is that you add new groups and then you can just plug them in. So these are like subroutines that you can plug in more and more, and now I have like 3 base terrains, but you could have 6 or 10. You can have, now I have 2 different types of hills. You can imagine you have 10 types of hills, and you can have a whole series of different features. And then the controllers come from up here, so you simply have to make these room for more. So I can just move them up here and make them bigger, and then make these bigger and just plug in the controller data and bring it down here. That's how the the modularity is key in this case. So you want to be able to plug in more and more stuff as needed. Okay, so when we've created the elevation data using the controllers, then the elevation data is sent here through this, and that's the river adjustment. And so far I only had a blur, but I wasn't sure when I did the rivers how much I needed to adjust the river data, so that's why I fed them through a small little group here, so I can actually go in and adjust things as needed for the rivers. But just a little bit of blur, that was all I felt I needed so far. And then the next big group here is texturing. Here is texturing and forests and everything that has to do with colors and forests is here. And this one is, you have the big brown here is every texture and every biome, and then you have this green one in here is all the biomes. And then I have the first biome is this kind of greenish brownish one here, and then I have a second biome, and it's not used yet. But what I can do is you simply take the data from this and you plug it so it goes through the same thing as here in the second biome and then fed back up again. That's the kind of difficulty when you work with a file of this complexity, is to route the data in some sort of way that makes it possible to go in and tweak it as needed. And when we look at how the textures and in what order, the first thing, I start from the bottom up. I start with the grasslands, what's on the dirt itself, on the soil, so to speak. So I put a lot of color generators, and I have colorizers, and then I blend them gradually, leading up to more and more. I kind of put them on, so I have like a basic green and a brown and a number of greens, and then I mix and match them according to elevation and slope and stuff, and end up with a final grass texture. And then I add things like ocean bottom texture. I have the ocean surface texture. You have creeks, meaning those tiny little rivers that are generated automatically. The thing is, rivers and lakes is something I add manually, but creeks is something that is generated through some clever programming thanks to GeoGlyph. I use GeoGlyph's reflow feature here. And then that creates creeks, small tiny lakes, and lots of small rivers and creeks, or tiny ones, wherever the terrain, it's appropriate in the terrain, so to speak. And then I texture that. They are generated here and they're textured here, and rivers are textured, and wetlands, that's basically the cousin of the the creeks. So wherever there is flat terrain that is completely flat and has like surrounded by a little bit of, but there is like a pit in the terrain that creates a wetland automatically. And then I have things like beaches. They are selected using, I use selectors, and then you use a number of colorizers to create beaches wherever it's appropriate. The same thing goes with rocks. They are created where it's appropriate considering the shape of the terrain for rocks to be apparent when there's no grass or soil or anything else. That's where the rocks will be. And now we have all the textures up to forest, and forests are added on top of it, both as bumps, meaning the forests that I do are just fakes. They're basically just bumps. They're not real trees. There is other types of software like Vue and Terragen and others that can actually create virtual trees that are 3D model trees. That's why in this my example I actually have one version with, that's I call WFOR, V4. That's actually bumps, and then I create a mask for that bump. So I have one elevation, altitude, height map that has the bumps on them, and another one without the bumps. The same thing with the texture. One texture with forest and one texture without forest. So I can actually go in and use either the bumps for like Photoshop or for large area maps, and if I want to close up and import it into Vue or Terragen, I can use a mask and create real 3D trees, or real but virtual 3D trees inside Vue or Terragen. And that is created here. So on the left side here you have, that's where I create the mask, and you have full forest and I have dense forest, and you can plug in more of them here because this is a seasonal area with quite a lot of forest. But if you have a desert area, for instance, you might have just sparse and very only vegetation in areas of oasis or whatever, and that can be controlled where each of these, where there will be full forest, meaning almost complete coverage, or dense coverage, and that's done, you control that using these here. The layout control is up there, and that controller data is then fed in here, and you get a mask coming out here, and that's the forest mask that tells World Machine what part of the terrain should actually be covered in trees or not. And then it comes in here, and I have two types of trees. I have conifers and deciduous trees, meaning leafy trees. And then it creates the bumps, and it also creates the color for each of them. And then I have various blurs and blend modes and stuff to get the bumps to look kind of like fake trees from a distance, and the same thing with the colors. And there's sometimes there are like leftover devices here that I can actually remove. That gets kind of they get abandoned as the project progresses. The same thing with here, you get certain devices that you realize you don't need, so I disabled it so I can actually remove it because it's not really used anymore. And then finally you get like forest texture, and you get a forest mask, and you get an elevation with the bumps, and you feed that out in parallel to the non-forested elevation and texture. And then all that is fed down here just in case you have a second biome that you want to do all this all over again. Then you plug the second biome in here, and you have the controllers that select primary or secondary biome. And then all the data is going here and disappearing. So the masks and the textures go here, and then some of it is fed down there. So you get all the data is flowing back up here to both to the view, so you can view it, and also for the red group here, and this is the export. This is where you have you can export all the data. So I have light map makers. They create the shadow maps that are used in Photoshop to create the top-down map, and you save them without trees, with trees. And also I have a temp here that if I don't want to save over the regular files if I just do a temporarily small little to look at things. So I have temporary ones in here too. You have elevation maps, you have all the that's just a texture map that is textured according to elevation, like in the previous examples that I did, example videos. I used an elevation map like that. And then you have um, the altitude, the height maps, and these are grayscale 16-bit TIFFs that are used in oh, excuse me, in Vue or TerraGen to create the 3D terrain. And then you have the textures without forest and the texture with forest. And then you have the masks, and the masks are critical for when you want to edit and touch up and do the final, get the final look of the textures in Photoshop afterwards. That's when the masks are really critical. And another use for the masks are if you want to uh, when you import it into Vue or TerraGen and you want to create the final 3D model with atmosphere and all that, then you can use the masks to select where should be water, where should be trees, and stuff like that. So they are useful for a lot of purposes afterwards. So here you create a whole bunch of masks and save them as TIFFs. And masks are just the black and white images that can be used in for various purposes to kind of touch up the terrain afterwards. So this was a kind of a maybe a little bit haphazard, but an overview of how the file is structured in World Machine, and it is kind of complicated, and sometimes the data flows in like rivers are, for instance, created first, and the terrain is actually created around lakes and rivers because that's the only way that I get erosion to work properly. But in principle, you have the controls, they generate the elevation, and the elevation data is fed in here that creates the textures, and then the forest on top, and you export out the data at the end. That's the major principle behind it. So, okay, thank you so much for watching, and I will be back soon in another video. Thank you so much. Bye.